Welcome, everyone. It's TJ Money. And this particular one might be a little controversial. Bear with me. In light of a lot of the political aspects, backlashes, etc., of modern America, I looked back at a very famous and very historical speech by a significant person that every American should know, a man by the name of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. He was the probably the most influential civil rights leader in America back in the 1950s, 1960s, mid 20th century, essentially. And he believed, and this kind of ties into the essence of the speech he had at Washington, D.C., on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial, which, by the way, I personally have seen. I seen the exact plaque on the steps. It marks where he stood, where he gave that speech, and I had that idea in my mind, or I had it's hard to explain. Like I had a mental picture. I saw that. It's like, wow. To think all those people came to hear this significant speech, and just imagine what it was like. Very, very powerful, very inspirational. But anyways, I caveat there, or I segued off a little bit there. Despite all the political backlash when it comes to the politicians and congressmen, senators, etc., one of the battles right now is that they choose to use it as a scapegoat, that they make everything racial. I'm not saying I'm for one thing or for another, but it's, as an everyday American, I personally think it's getting a little ridiculous, because I believe in a similar concept or a similar ideal that Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Once felt, that we shouldn't look at each other by the color of our skin, or pigmentation, or whether it be our creed, our national origin, etc. Those are personal characteristics that I'm sure could be celebrated, and I'm all for that within the family atmosphere. But at the same time, it's something that really shouldn't define us. For those of us that are in this country, in the United States, that are watching this right now, keep in mind that I don't look at you as black. I don't look at you as white. I don't look at you as, whatever race or whatever sexual orientation or whatever. I look at you as an American, an everyday American, and so on and so forth. That, I think, is what really brings us together, is just the idea that we all belong to one thing. It's to kind of help that point after 9/11, for example, the moments just after, and even for like the couple of years after that, there was a feeling that every American in this country was proud to be American, and there was a sense of community for everyone. Like everyone was looking out for each other. There was no backstabbing. There was no cutthroat type of deal. There was none of that stuff you see today, which honestly really sickens me. I wish we went back to the feeling where there was a sense of community, where people actually cared about one another. But this I Have a Dream speech, and the title of I Have a Dream, his dream, I'll get to in a second. But the reason why he uses that is because at the time, the civil rights movement was pushing for or advocating for, as I was, um, the civil rights of Black Americans in the country, but at the same time, through tactics of nonviolence and equality for every American, regardless of color. Uh, but I'll get to that in a second. So I'll recite it. I'll analyze it for you, and I hope you enjoy. I have a dream speech. As I'm reading this now, he commonly uses the word Negro. Um, so bear with me on that. I understand that's not the exact N word that offends everyone, but just keep that in mind that this is his words, not mine. I am happy to join with you today in what will go down in history as the greatest demonstration for freedom in the history of our nation. So very straightforward to begin with. 50 years ago, a great American, he's referring to Abraham Lincoln, 16th President of the United States, in whose symbolic shadow we stand today, signed the Emancipation Proclamation, another famous document, the one that freed the slaves. This momentous decree came as a great beacon of light, of hope, to millions of Negro slaves who had been seared in the flames of withering injustice. It came as a joyous daybreak to end the long night of their captivity. But 100 years later, the Negro is still not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. So, in that sentence, he's saying that the average black man lives in poverty amidst material prosperity. So, I'm sure it was a common statistic that the poverty rate was high for Black Americans at the time. Anyways, where was I? 100 years later, the Negro is still languished in the corners of American society and finds himself in exile in his own land. And so we've come here today to dramatize a shameful condition. So he's saying that the average Black American at the time, he's saying that many are poor, many are feel unwanted, unwelcome in their own area, in their own town, their own community, whatnot. And this speech is essentially addressing the conditions of what it was like to be a Black American in the late 50s and 1960s as well. So he says, in a sense, we've come to our nation's capital to cash a check. So Washington, D.C., in the United States of America. Washington, D.C., specifically the Lincoln Memorial, as is mentioned prior, when Abraham Lincoln signed the Emancipation Proclamation in 1862. Where was I? Okay. When the architects of our republic wrote the magnificent words of the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence. Architects of our republic. So the United States is well, in theory, it's supposed to be a democratic republic. The United States was a nation established in 1776 by a group of better off financially and etc. Founders. These were men who wanted to rebel against the tyranny and oppression of the British Crown at the time in the 18th century, when we were still a colony of England. These were men who built the foundations of our great country. These are men that are revered now as our founding fathers. The Constitution, I believe, was written by a founding father and a president, James Madison. I believe he was the fourth president. And then the Declaration of Independence, obviously, written by Thomas Jefferson. And he goes into detail and emphasizes key words in the Declaration of Independence and Constitution. They were signing a promissory note to which every American was to fall heir. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men as well as white men, so he's emphasizing every man, would be guaranteed the unalienable rights. So if you've sat in U.S. history class or social studies class or what have you, unalienable rights, your teachers would say that unalienable rights, the keyword unalienable. So alien meaning foreign, meaning external, not from around here, something that's not internal. So obviously the prefix, meaning the lack thereof, or something that's not what it would have been, but not the opposite. Unalienable rights. So these two words into one phrase, unalienable rights, means that these are rights that are not foreign. These are rights that are not external. These are ones that belong. Keyword, remember that, belong. These are words that belong to every man, meaning they can't be taken away. And these unalienable rights that are mentioned in the Declaration of Independence: life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He goes on to say, it is obvious today that America has defaulted on this promissory note insofar as her citizens of color are concerned. So he's saying that it's pretty clear that in 1963 that, well, not everyone is really living the life that they were promised, essentially. Instead of honoring the sacred obligation, America has given the Negro people a bad check, a check which has come back marked insufficient funds. So he's saying that the United States has given Black Americans kind of a poor shot or bad chance at what everyone else had. It was making that particular community feel like they were cheated out of those luxuries and those privileges, those rights, what have you. He goes on to say, but we refuse to believe that the Bank of Justice is bankrupt. Wow, what a powerful sentence. He means that if justice was a bank, it wouldn't be bankrupt, meaning justice is still existing. It can happen. It will happen. We refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity of this nation. What an analogy. So he says, we refuse to believe that there are insufficient funds in the great vaults of opportunity. So what he means by that is that opportunity is something that is not necessarily come and go. It is something that will always be there. And there are multiple paths, multiple opportunities for every man and woman to pursue. This isn't something that is only afforded to a certain few. He says, and so we've come to cash this check, a check that will give us upon demand the riches of freedom and the security of justice. Very fair statement. He's essentially saying, in layman's terms, hey, we weren't given the lives afforded to us by the founding fathers. This was something that was promised to us. So what gives? All we want was our freedom and security of justice, just like every other American. And we will fight for it through nonviolence and speech. Anyways, he goes on to say, we have also come to this hallowed spot to remind America of the fierce urgency of now, meaning this happens to happen now. This is no time to engage in the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Wow. He's a very powerful speaker. So he's saying that the luxury of cooling off or to take the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. Luxury of cooling off means he feels that people in power have, or at the time, had to say, oh, give you 100 years or so and be all right. Or the tranquilizing drug of gradualism. So a tranquilizer is something that's supposed to calm down an animal, which is usually what it's targeted for, or to give something peace. It's derivative of the word tranquility, which is giving someone peace and serenity and so on and so forth. Gradualism is, they're saying that this isn't something that happened gradually, or happens gradually, or needs to happen gradually. It's something that needs to happen now, right then and there. No ifs, ands, or buts. Speeding right up to it, hitting it like a freaking truck, right? This isn't something that it's like a stepping ladder, like the Civil War and no longer being a slave was. This is something that needs to happen now. Keep that in mind. So, he says, now is the time to make real the promises of democracy, which is kind of emphasizing what I'm saying. Now is the time to lift our nation from the quicksands of racial injustice to the solid rock of brotherhood. See, he's saying that racial injustice of the time, Jim Crow laws, segregation, whatnot, that is something that people fall into, people succumb to, or fall victim to the solid rock of brotherhood. So brotherhood or sisterhood for women, it's something that's structured, something that's clear, precise, it's solid. It's something that won't break free. It's something that won't be easily destroyed. Very good choice of words, Dr. King. But anyways, he says, now is the time to make justice a reality for all of God's children. Keep in mind, Dr. King was a minister, a Christian minister. And now is the time to make justice a reality. He's saying it's going to happen now. All right, rewind. So, in essence, those 3 paragraphs, he was saying that Black Americans were not afforded the life and an American dream that most others had. This is a change that needs to happen now, and it's a change that will help everyone to have that freedom and security of justice for everyone. Now Let's see. Okay. It would be fatal for the nation to overlook the urgency of the moment. The sweltering summer of the Negro's legitimate discontent will not pass until there is an invigorating autumn of freedom and equality. 1963 is not an end, but a beginning. So he's clearly stating that the year is only just beginning. What would be a byproduct of this speech and the civil rights movement in general. And those who hope that the Negro needed to blow off steam and will now be content will have a rude awakening if the nation returns to business as usual. And there will be neither rest nor tranquility in America until the Negro is granted his citizenship rights, which I believe did happen. This was Civil Rights Act signed by Lyndon Johnson, President Kennedy's successor, in 1965. So about the same time we were going to Vietnam. The whirlwinds of revolt will continue to shake the foundations of our nation until the bright day of justice emerges, saying that, that particular year was really a beginning for success for the civil rights movement, for everyone to achieve equality, freedom, that sense of justice, and to truly be equal amongst everyone. There's no one over the other, etc. And they won't be silenced. They won't stop speaking about this until it happens. They'll do whatever it takes for that. In that context, they won't resort to violence. He says, but there is something that I must say to my people who stand on the warm threshold which leads into the palace of justice. In the process of gaining our rightful place, we must not be guilty of wrongful deeds. This is where he gets into the non-violence part of his philosophy. Let us not seek to satisfy our thirst for freedom by drinking from the cup of bitterness and hatred. To not hate your enemy, love thy enemy. So that's actually a teaching from Jesus Christ, the leading person in Christianity, I guess, to say it properly. Because I know that certain faiths do have different views on that particular figure. Anyways, he says we must forever conduct our struggle on the high plane of dignity and discipline. We must not allow our creative protests to degenerate into physical violence. Very clearly stating we need to be nonviolent. Again and again, we must rise to the majestic heights of meeting physical force with soul force. The marvelous new militancy which has engulfed the Negro community must not lead us to a distrust of white people. For many of our white brothers, as evidenced by their presence here today, have come to realize that their destiny is tied up with our destiny. So in the Million Man March, there was a few white Americans along that march that were joining with them to show them, hey, don't be afraid. We'll support you, that sort of thing. And they have come to realize that their freedom is inextricably bound to our freedom. We cannot walk alone. And as we walk, we must take the pledge that we shall always march ahead. We cannot turn back. So we must hop up together and march forward together. There's no looking back. There are those who are asking the devotees of civil rights, when will you be satisfied? So he brings up that question, and he answers that question with, we can never be satisfied as long as the Negro is the victim of the unspeakable horrors of police brutality. We can never be satisfied as long as our bodies, heavy with the fatigue of travel, cannot gain lodging in the motels of the highways and hotels of the cities. We cannot be satisfied as long as the Negro's basic mobility is from a smaller ghetto to a larger one. We can never be satisfied as long as our children are stripped of their selfhood and robbed of their dignity by signs stating "for whites only." We cannot be satisfied as long as a Negro in Mississippi cannot vote and a Negro in New York believes he has nothing for which to vote. No, no, we are not satisfied. So he's kind of similar to the Declaration of Independence and the um, 95 Theses that Martin Luther back in the 1500s had. Both documents, kind of referring to them, had reasons for why this whole speech is happening in the first place. He's pointing out, okay, this happens, somebody said this, yada, yada, yada. That's got to stop, is what he's saying. Very similar to those two other documents in time. He says, no, no, we are not satisfied, and we will not be satisfied until justice rolls down like waters and righteousness like a mighty stream. So justice comes all over us. He goes, I am not unmindful that some of you have come here out of great trials and tribulations. Some of you have come fresh from narrow jail cells, and some of you have come from areas where your quest for freedom left you battered by the storms of persecution and staggered by the winds of police brutality. You have been the veterans of creative suffering. Continue to work with the faith that unearned suffering is redemptive. So he's saying that just the sheer fact that you showed up in the conditions that you showed up, or in the conditions of how you showed up, is very brave, is what he's saying. It's very brave of them all. He goes, go back to Mississippi, go back to Alabama, go back to South Carolina, go back to Georgia, go back to Louisiana, go back to the slums and ghettos of our northern cities, knowing that somehow this situation can and will be changed. So he's saying, go back to where you came from and know that somehow the situation can and will be changed. He says, let us not wallow in the valley of despair, I say to you today, my friends. And so even though we face the difficulties of today and tomorrow, I still have a dream. That's where he gets into the essence of the speech. It is a dream deeply rooted in the American dream. I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal. So he quotes the Declaration of Independence, and this quote in particular being very significant for civil rights. I have a dream that one day on the red hills of Georgia, the sons of former slaves and the sons of former slave owners will be able to sit down together at the table of brotherhood, that everyone can come together, essentially. I have a dream that one day even the state of Mississippi, a state sweltering with the heat of injustice, sweltering with the heat of oppression, will be transformed into an oasis of freedom and justice. So Mississippi at the time was probably one of the worst states to live in as a Black American, because you had the reemergence of the Ku Klux Klan, you had the Jim Crow laws, you had so on and so forth. It was a very bad place to live in at the time. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character. So that's the most famous line of this whole speech, and is essentially saying that if I go to you, I won't judge you by what you look like. I will judge you by how you act, by how you are as a person. Makes sense, right? He goes, I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day down in Alabama, with its vicious racists, with its governor having his lips dripping with the words of interposition and nullification. So that's referring to George Bull O'Connor, probably one of the most proactive, pro-segregation, governors in the South's history. One day, right there in Alabama, little black boys and black girls will be able to join hands with little white boys and white girls as sisters and brothers. I have a dream today. I have a dream that one day every valley shall be exalted, and every hill and mountain shall be made low. The rough places will be made plain, and the crooked places will be made straight. And the glory of the Lord shall be revealed, and all flesh shall see it together. Essentially, referring back to the main idea that everyone needs to come together. He says, "This is our hope, and this is the faith that I go back to the South with. With this faith, we will be able to hew out of the mountain of despair of stone of hope. We'll see the light, there's a better future ahead. With this faith, we will be able to transform the jangling discords of our nation into a beautiful symphony of brotherhood." So at this point, it's kind of getting repetitive. With this faith, we will be able to work together, to pray together, to struggle together, to go to jail together, to stand up for freedom together, knowing that that we will be free one day. And this will be the day. He pauses a lot for a dramatic effect. This will be the day when all of God's children will be able to sing with new meaning. And he quotes him, or I think it's him. Bear with me. "My country, 'tis of thee, land of liberty, of thee I sing. Land where my fathers died, land of the pilgrim's pride. From every mountainside let freedom ring. And if America is to be a great nation, this must become true." So the next 5 to 10 lines are repeating the 3 words, "Let freedom ring," and he names a bunch of locations. And so, let freedom ring from the prodigious hilltops of New Hampshire. Let freedom ring from the mighty mountains of New York. Let freedom ring from the heightening Alleghenies of Pennsylvania. Let freedom ring from the snow-capped Rockies of Colorado. Let freedom ring from the curvaceous slopes of California. But not only that, and he starts mentioning southern states. Let freedom ring from the Stone Mountain of Georgia. Let freedom ring from Lookout Mountain of Tennessee. Let freedom ring from every hill and molehill of Mississippi. From every mountainside, let freedom ring. That last line is pretty straightforward. Both north and southern states, the entire country, the United States of America, let freedom ring. And I think that is a very powerful way to say it. He goes, when this happens, when we allow freedom ring, so he's kind of explaining when it will happen and what will happen. When we let it ring from every village and every hamlet, from every state and every city, we will be able to speed up that day when all of God's children, black and white men, Jews and Gentiles, Protestants and Catholics, will be able to join hands and sing them the words of the old Negro spiritual. Free at last, free at last. Thank God Almighty, we are free at last. So those last few words, the spiritual, that is definitely one of the most powerful send-offs of a speech that Martin Luther King has ever had in his time. Of course, he was shot and killed 5 years later on the balcony of a motel in Memphis, Tennessee. The impact that men like him, Mahatma Gandhi in India, and so many other civil rights leaders, whether that be 60 years ago or whether that be today, just know that amidst all the political controversy that infests this country nowadays. Yeah, I said it. We're all human. We all have different skin colors. We all have different orientations. We all have different yada yada. But in the case of here in the United States, you know what we are. Most of all, we're American, and be proud of that. Americans have a history of overcoming numerous challenges, so much adversity over the years, whether that be personal or an external conflict. Um, kind of the impact of that speech really makes me think um, towards the few movements out there right now, and in the past few summers since the pandemic began, and even before a couple of years before that. Um, each and every life out there matters. Whether you are white, whether you are black, whether you are a different race, whether you are a different orientation, every life matters. Some people out there will not agree with what I have to say, and honestly don't know how to contemplate that sort of thing. But yeah, every life matters. Not just one group over the other. That's ridiculous. It doesn't make sense. It's it's brainwashing. It's brainwashing. I'm sorry. It is. And it made me fearful for a long time hearing these stories or hearing these rumors and yada yada about this particular group going on about that. And some of the controversies and the fighting, and it baffles me. It really does. Um, but yeah, just keep that in mind, there, folks, and that's something to think about. It's I do hope that in the near future we do come to our senses as a country, and as a matter for the rest of the world. I do hope that we really do come to our senses and say, hey, we're not a particular group of this and that. We're a community throughout the whole world. Here in the United States, we're Americans. But throughout the rest of the world, you understand what I'm saying? It's throughout the whole world, we're a community. And the world and the human race has been through asinine levels of adversity in the past 4 or 5 thousand years, or even before that. It's we need people to come together. War is hell. People are out in the streets starving, out in the cold or the heat. Wherever you are in the world, there is always someone suffering, whether it be their own choice, whether it be they had no choice. We need to become a community again. We need to help others, because it's not this virtue signaling thing that certain people do. And by the way, that sickens me too. It's we need to actually show that we care about other people, no matter what their situation is. So keep that in mind. I know that this has been a very controversial topic, but just keep what I had said in mind. So, on a lighter note, take it easy, guys. It's been CJ Money. Have a great one. Bye.